All right, so for those of you that missed introductions, my name is Nate Wallman. If you're interested in following me on Twitter, you can do so at @nwallman. My Twitter feed is primarily made up of fishing, gaming, Husker football, and occasional technology tweets. So if you're into that kind of thing, maybe I'm worth a follow, but otherwise I understand. I'm a solution architect with CRI, so you could argue that makes me a jack of all trades, master of none. So I have my hands on just about everything we do in the Solution Center at some capacity. So web, API, I've even had to dabble a little bit in iOS, which I don't like to openly confess to, but yes, I'll even do iOS if the need arises. I've been doing software development for a little over 10 years in my area. I graduated from UNO. I started out doing a lot of web development. About midway through my career, I migrated to web services, API development, and then now here in the Solution Center, I've done, as I mentioned, a little bit of everything. As opposed to like doing a deep dive into one of the features, what I've done is I've kind of taken kind of a broad scope, and I'll introduce you to more than one topic. So the outline for my talk is as follows. So first, I'll just kind of explain what Firebase is for those of you that may not be experienced with it. I'll kind of talk about why you should care about it, and then probably about half, if not 3/4 of the talk will be live coding. So I want to try to take a simple app that I put together and put Firebase into action, and then I'll leave some time for question and answers. So to start out, Firebase is a cloud solution, which I know I'll have a slide on this in the future to kind of give you an idea of what that means, but you don't have to worry about standing up any infrastructure yourself. So everything is provided for you by Firebase, so it's really easy to get started in that sense. It's owned by Google, so for those of you that kind of followed Firebase in the beginning, it started out as a real-time database. So the way I understand the history of it is I think it's only a couple guys that started building a real-time chat service, and they found out that their users of the real-time chat service, because of how effective it was, were starting to persist and store data outside of just chat messages. So they're like, okay, maybe we should make this more generic so people can use it for other needs. So they started going down that route, and then Google acquired them. So Google purchased Firebase. Originally it was just a real-time database, and since then they've added all kinds of features to the suite to make it much more usable. And they break those features or products into two different categories: those that are designed around development and testing of your application to kind of speed up that process, and then the second portion of those services are to grow your audience and engage them. So with Firebase, they do come with, Firebase comes with SDKs for Android, iOS, web, Unity, and C++. So it's really easy to get started using the SDKs. The only caveat is not every single one of their features has support for all of those platforms. Pretty much, at least all the ones that I looked in closely had support for Android and iOS, but not all of them have, say, an SDK for Unity or C++. So those maybe are coming, I don't know, but definitely if you're in the Android and iOS space, pretty much all the features that are provided by Firebase, you'll have a nice SDK to get you started and growing. So as I kind of mentioned on the previous slide or a slide back, cloud services is kind of this massive discussion. Like, it's hard to know, like, it's a cloud service. Okay, what does that mean? And even in the cloud service realm, there's a lot of different variety in terms of, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Firebase. Like, where do they fall on the spectrum? So I wanted to kind of put in a slide in here to kind of show both ends of the entire spectrum and let you know kind of where Firebase falls. So in your traditional IT department with no cloud services, your IT department's responsible for everything from data centers all the way up to applications. It's all managed by your IT department. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, software as a service, you can think of companies like Google Apps, Salesforce, GoToMeeting, any kind of service that you're able to take advantage of where you don't have to worry about standing up anything to support it. And that's where you have a software as a service. Then kind of in the middle, infrastructure as a service, you can think of Azure, Amazon, and that even there is kind of a blurry line because, so like infrastructure as a service, for example, if those are familiar with Amazon, they have EC2, which you can stand up like a virtual machine where you can choose the operating system, you can choose the database, you can kind of set up and configure your virtual machine as you want. So you can do that with EC2 with Amazon, but they also have Amazon has Elastic Beanstalk, where more of that is taken care of you behind the scene. So Elastic Beanstalk falls more so under the platform as a service. So just to give you a sense, Firebase falls more in the platform as a service category. I put backend as a service because I guess that's a term that's kind of popping up in the space. So technically you could label Firebase as a backend as a service similar to Parse, where basically you're just building your application on top of the platform. And that's why I don't know if that's really, I don't know why they made that distinction between platform and backend, because really they're pretty similar in my mind. So I just want to make sure you guys are clear that that is where Firebase is falling. So you don't have to worry about if you've used Amazon Web Services and you've had to customize a security group or set up a database and kind of do some of the configuration, and that's a little intense for you, you don't have to worry about doing that with Firebase. Sure.
Those acronyms up on the top, what do they mean?
So yeah, IaaS is infrastructure as a service, PaaS is platform as a service, and so yeah, software as a service. Did I put one too many in there? No, I'm good. I'm good. And then business or backend as a service. So yeah, that's a little bit on where that falls or where Firebase falls along that spectrum. So now I just wanted to kind of highlight some of those features that Firebase has. So that first category, as I mentioned, was development and testing. These are some of the suite of products that Firebase provides that are help to speed that up. So if you want a place to store files and serve them at scale, you can use cloud storage. Or if you want to host static content, you can use their hosting functionality. So all these tools are centered around building an app, developing it out, and testing it in a really quick fashion, so you don't have to stand up and support this stuff for yourself. The second category is grow and engage. So again, these are all features that are designed to help you grow and engage your audience. So we're going to go into some of these in detail, so I'm not really going to dwell on them, but I just want to give you an idea of some of the features that Firebase supports. So as I mentioned in the previous slides, I wanted to not touch on all of them, but I did want to highlight a couple that I think you should, or at least that I think are pretty neat that you should be aware of. So the first one is the authentication. So Firebase has a really a neat authentication component out of the box, and why you should care about that. Number one is security. So authentication and authorization is one of those things where if you don't know what you're doing, I mean really know what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be implementing yourself, because you can really leave yourself open to a world of hurt if you try to just roll this yourself. So this is where it's really great if you're unsure, you haven't done authentication before, authorization, you're not sure how to secure your application. It's really great to leverage someone else that really knows how to do it, right? So Google's done has vast experience in this area, so you can leverage what they know and not have to worry about rolling your own. Another advantage is third-party support. So as you can see in the bottom right there, out of the box with Firebase, you can easily integrate with Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and then if you want to roll your own, you can. So just with very little code, you can get, say, Twitter authentication working out of the box. If you want to have your users not necessarily have to sign up, you want them to be authenticate with Twitter, you can get that with very little work with Firebase. Integrates with other Firebase services, so we'll talk a little bit, maybe I'll wait to talk about that with the RealTime Database, but once you have a user authenticated, you can like secure the data within your Firebase database, so that's important to know. Kind of along that lines, it's really easy to implement. We'll actually add Firebase authentication to an app during this, so we'll see just how easy it is to do. And then even for the UI portion, so I don't have to, if I don't want to build a whole UI flow for signing up and logging in, I can use Firebase as a UI component that I can just drop in and use their flow. So I don't have to build a custom login screen or any of that. I can just use theirs out of the box if I want.
So my understanding, I've looked into the authentication a little bit before. So you can't really use that unless you buy into Firebase, right? You can't like use Firebase Authentication because it like saves your username and password or whatever into their system, and you like if you like you can't like let's say if somebody has their own backend, you can't really interface with that. Basically, the plan with Firebase Authentication is you're using Firebase as your database, right? Or is there any workaround that you ever heard of that?
So I didn't explore that at all, I'll be quite honest with you.
Okay.
So can you use just Firebase authentication and then roll your own for everything else? I don't know if that's possible, and I wouldn't want to make claims one way or the other.
They have a single sign-on and a custom auth. So you still use Firebase as your primary database, and for your users, but it's still leveraging your backend.
Okay, so next up, moving on, what we have the real-time database. I don't know why I put a slide in there for real-time. It's kind of self-explanatory. But so if you're using the Firebase real-time database, the SDK for that, as you're storing data via the SDK, it's automatically syncing that with the cloud, and it will push it out to other devices that are connected. So you really get that real-time behavior with very little work on your own. Something to consider also with Firebase is it's a NoSQL solution, so it's actually like a JSON hierarchy. I'm not familiar with MongoDB, but just the way I've heard it described, it sounds like there's some similarities between the two. So if you haven't worked with NoSQL before, there's some pros and cons to it. So one of the driving reasons behind NoSQL is performance. Relational databases don't necessarily perform as fast as, say, a NoSQL solution. So performance and efficiency, that's one of the reasons why I think they went the NoSQL route. But if you're going to go with NoSQL, you need to be aware that if you're used to a relational database, there's going to be some growing pains in switching to NoSQL because the data is structured differently. So you kind of have to break that normal thought process you may have around using a relational database. Next, offline mode. So this is actually pretty neat with very little work on your own part, actually no work I should say. You get offline mode support, and we'll demo that, but essentially if you're using the Firebase SDK and you're persisting data and there's no connection, it's going to save those for you on the device, and when it does have a connection, it'll automatically sync those to the cloud for you. So I'll demo that tonight, and literally there's no code to actually get that to work. So no API networking. So typically, if you wanted to set up your own mobile app, you probably want an API that you can use to persist data. With this, you don't have to worry about configuring that. You can use Firebase's. We'll see examples of this too, but you don't have to set up your own API. You don't have to worry about the networking layer. That's all handled by the Firebase SDK. So as long as you're using their SDK, you can push and read from that database, and there's really no work on your part as opposed to just interacting with the SDK itself. Lastly, on the database portion is security. So we talked about it with authentication, but once your users are authenticated, you can apply roles on the database that rely on that authentication. So if you want to secure certain pieces of your database or the NoSQL database, you can do so using rules that are built in. So there's a rule engine. I won't go into that, but if you guys are curious, I can kind of show you what that looks like. But so yeah, you can get secure data by tying it into the authentication component. Go ahead.
Is offline mode good for web and mobile?
I would assume so. I didn't do any web testing, so I can't speak to that. Cloud messaging.
Yeah.
Okay, let me bring up my notes on this because I want to make sure I get these statistics right. So when I say it's scalable and fast, they have some statistics around that I wanted to quote, so it's not just me. So yeah, Google is advertising, if you take them at their word, they say they process billions of these cloud messages every single day. Oops, sorry, let me go back. And they process 95% of those billions of messages within 250 milliseconds. So you can use this messaging service and not have to worry about scale and not have to worry about performance. These messages are customizable, so you can choose to do things such as deliver them on a schedule. You can even determine like you want it delivered at a certain time based on the user's time zone. You can customize that. You can customize things such as the actual data that's sent with the messages, the priority, like when the message expires, what sound plays when the message is received. So you can customize these messages that come out. Excuse me, I think I'm going to back up. Targetable. So next up is targetable. So with these messages, you can choose to only send messages to a subset of your users. So you can use their predefined segments. So an example of a predefined segment would be by app version. Say you've released a new version of the app and you want to send a reminder to all your users on a previous version, hey, the new version's out, you should really consider upgrading for X, Y, and Z. So with these predefined segments, you can choose, hey, message users of this version, and it will just send the messaging to those. You can also set up your own user-created segments if you want, or a better example is topics. So there's a sense of you can set up different topics and let your users to subscribe to those topics, so they'll only get notifications if they're subscribed to those topics. So you can really target who's going to receive these messages as opposed to just sending it to everyone that's using your app. And it's free, which is kind of neat. I think this get your foot in the door. But integrated with analytics. So with that, if you want to see how effective these messages are, what's nice is out of the box this is integrated to their analytics component. So if you're using the analytics with Firebase, you can really get a sense for how effective these messages are, how many people are opening them, and that kind of thing. So you can kind of get those reports with little to no effort on your part. All right, the last one is dynamic links and invites. Technically with Firebase, these are two different features, but one builds on the other. Now these are pretty neat. So you can think of, I'm trying to think of let's talk about a really popular use case. So say you have your app and you want your users to be able to tweet out or message other users content from within your app. What happens if that user doesn't have your app installed? How are they going to get to that specific content within your app? That's a problem that you face. Or what happens if I'm an Android user and I link to Johnny, who's this iOS sucker? How is that going to work for him, right? He's not going to be able to go in and see the Android app. So that's where dynamic links comes in. So it survives install and is platform independent. So you can generate these dynamic links from within your app, and it will, if it will detect the user doesn't have the device installed, it'll automatically take them to the correct app store to install the app. And once they're installed, it'll return them to the correct destination within the app, which is pretty impressive, I think. So that's both survives install and is platform independent and effective for growth. So the invites portion builds on top of that. So invites is a service where you can have your users invite other users into the app. So you can do this via SMS or email. So it's a way, and with those I should say, you can send registration codes. Say if you want to build a feature where if you invite 5 people to the app, I'll give you the next month free on the service or whatnot. So you can kind of build that functionality in with the dynamic invites, which is built on top of dynamic links. And just like cloud messaging, it's integrated with analytics. So if you want to get that kind of monitoring or get a sense of how well they're working, if you want to tweak, make your invites more effective or whatnot, you can monitor that with analytics. All right, so now with Murphy's Law in mind, we'll go to the live coding section. So what I've done is I've essentially set up a very simple app, which I'll demo first, which is my really sweet run, what I don't know, what do you want to call it? I can record my races that I've taken place in. These aren't actual numbers, but so this is a simple list view where I have a fab button where I can add new races to it. I know standing on its own, this is pretty sweet, and everyone wants to sign up and use it right away, but we're going to add some functionality to it to make it a little bit more powerful. But first I just want to show you the way it works now. So this is just all in memory. So I can add a new item and it shows up in the list, but if I restart this app, it's going to be gone because it's not persisted anywhere. So we are going to go through adding a couple of features using Firebase to make this app a little bit more fully featured. So first up is authentication. So we're going to slap some authentication on with this. So first off, if you haven't used Firebase before, let me see, I got to remember how to get to, yeah, so the first thing you want to do is install, under the SDK tools, is this Android support repository. So when you install this, it gives you this Firebase Assistant. So I can go to Tools and go to Firebase and run the Firebase Assistant, which kind of can help you get started if you haven't done Firebase before. So I've already went ahead and installed this, but so let's say if we're going to start with authentication, I want to set up an email and password authentication. It goes in and gives you the steps you need to get this started. So we will go ahead and do that. So we'll start out by connecting Firebase. Now, let me go to the console. This first one, I've already actually went ahead and set up my Firebase demo here. The reason why I had to do this is since I was going through this demo and doing this so many times, I would add a project, remove it, add a project, remove it to test this out, and I hit quotas and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to go through the full thing, but really it's as simple as hitting the connect to Firebase. I'll show you this here. Yeah, so I've already sunk. Wait, what? That shouldn't be. Did I already? Oh, that's. Let me see if I can remove this guy and re-go through this again. And we'll cross the fingers that I didn't just jack something up here. Alright, so it was already there because I went through this earlier today to make sure everything was working right, and now I'll probably have botched it. But so if I go here to connect, okay, good. So I can either create a new one that doesn't exist in Firebase, or I can choose an existing, which I already have the Firebase demo out there. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect to this one. Alright, so we're connected. So that's the first step done. Next, add Firebase Authentication to your app. It's going to show you what you're going to do. So you're going to add some files to your class path and add some plugins. So we'll go ahead and accept these changes. So let me go to my Gradle file here. I went ahead and already went through these. Some of these are the Firebase UI component, which I'm going to be using, had some complexities in terms of it's based on older versions, so I went ahead and overrode those. So let me remove this here, and I'll use the ones that I've So I'm adding the Firebase UI, which if you were using this by itself, it's going to pull in these dependencies for you, the Firebase Auth, Firebase Database, and Firebase Storage. But because the Firebase UI 2.1.1 is relying on 11.04.2, I went ahead and overrode those here. Alright, so now I have the dependencies in my project. So the next thing I'm going to do, I already have this kind of login activity in place, but I'm not actually using it. So let me go to my, oops, that's not what I wanted. Go to my manifest and uncomment some code here to add the login activity, and I'll make it the one that we're going to start on launch. So I'm going to get rid of this here. And now we're going to go ahead and take this simple login activity with nothing much to it and go ahead and add some functionality to it. So I am not going to do all this coding on the fly. So we'll go ahead and grab some of this and I'll explain it as I go through it. Oops. Alright. So when we start up, we are going to get the current authorized user if one exists. If we have one, we're going to go ahead and launch the dashboard activity. That's what I'm doing here. And then if we don't have an authenticated user, we're going to go ahead and launch a new activity. Why did we import this guy? Thank you. I would have got to that eventually. Alright. So I do need to implement this get authenticated providers method, which I've done here. So I'll explain these here in a second. Alright. So as I said, this first part's pretty self-explanatory. Grab the current authenticated user if we have one. If we do, go ahead and launch the dashboard activity because we're authenticated. Otherwise, we're going to launch the Firebase UI's kind of login flow. And this is all the code necessary to do that. You can customize what app theme, what logos provided, what available providers, which we'll get to. There's all kinds of different customizations you can choose to change how you want that auth UI to work. So the providers, these are the providers that you actually want the users to be able to authenticate with. So those are the ones that we talked about with authentication. You can add them for Twitter, Facebook, etc. But for this demo, we'll just do Google and email. So those are the providers that we're going to support. The last piece is, so when they successfully exit out of the Firebase UI, we want to handle what to do, right? So if we defined up here the request code of 100, so if it's all successful, request code of 100 is going to come out, and down here on the activity result, we're going to check for that. Hey, we know they're successfully signed in, so now we're going to go ahead and launch them into the dashboard activity. So that code right there, in theory, should work, and we should be hooked into Firebase Authentication. So now everyone can cross their fingers and toes, and we will hope that this works. Oh, you know what? I know it's not going to work because I forgot to do one of the critical things. So I got to come in here to authentication for this particular application and enable. Okay. Wait, am I under the right one? Oh, because I didn't actually delete the entire project, it still has the email and password, or email and Google options enabled. So you do have to go ahead and turn on the individual ones that you want to support and sign in. So I've already done that here. All right, so that looks promising. So it automatically pulled up the new flow that we showed. So this is all powered by the Firebase UI. I haven't done anything to support this, and it gives me my two options. I can sign in with Google or sign in with email. So I will go ahead and do this. I'll select. It knows I've already registered my work email on this account, so it should prompt me to select. Or I guess since I've already done this before on this app, it already knows that that's the one account I have on here. So now I've successfully authenticated with my email, which we can verify if I come to users. Yeah, so I didn't fully delete this user, so that's why it automatically knew that I was already authenticated on this emulator with it. So it automatically synced with that, so I didn't actually have to select that. But if I hadn't already had this user, actually let's try that, so you don't think I'm just making stuff up. Let me delete this account, and let me just restart this here.
That app in the background looked nice.
Let's see if this works. In theory, because there's no user. Okay, I'm not sure how that's working. That's all working out of the box with Firebase. Let's see if it has me in here as N. Wallman. So again, I think that's that smart lock. Do I have that enabled? No, I don't. Okay, so I don't fully understand how the Firebase UI all works, but out of the box, we're authenticating with Google. You can see it correctly has me authenticated with the Google provider with my my actual email address there. So that is authentication out of the box. We got that for free. Let's go ahead and move on because I want to get to some of the other ones. The next thing I want to demo is the Firebase Database. So what we're going to do next is show the race repository class. So this is where I am storing that race data today. Like I was showing you, each time it starts up, it's just storing this list of races in memory that I've just kind of hard-coded here. So we are going to go ahead and get rid of this list in memory here. And instead, we're going to introduce Firebase. So before we do that, let's make sure we have the right. Oh, we already have it in our Gradle file because it's used by Firebase, the UI portion. So let's go ahead and just get a reference to the database. So as I kind of mentioned, Firebase is a JSON hierarchy, so I can get a reference to a specific node. There is no, if we go to the database portion, right now there is no data in here. That's why it's showing null. This is the root element, which is my generated app name. There's no data in it, so it's just null right now. But so if we want to insert a races node that holds all the races, we can get a reference to it here with this Firebase SDK. So we'll get a reference to the races, and then what we want to do is the way Firebase works is with callbacks here. So I want to add a child event listener where I can do child event listener. So in order to handle callbacks, like when the database has an insert in it, you have to implement these methods. So what happens when it's on canceled, or when a child is moved, or if a child's changed, etc. So these are all callback methods that get called when something happens on the server side. So what we're going to do is we are just going to handle the child added as an example here. So we're going to get out of this. This is one thing I don't like. When you're generating code, sometimes it incorrectly generates this as an optional in Kotlin. don't know why it does that, but this snapshot should not be optional, so I'm safe to remove that question mark, but that's another advanced topic. So I'm going to go ahead and get the value out of that data snapshot. So when Firebase, when a change is made to the database, Firebase is going to call this on child added, if a child is in fact added to the database. So I should be more clear. So based on which type of data change occurs on Firebase, it's going to call back to this child event listener. So we're going to handle the child added, and maybe it might make a little bit more sense if we handled insert first. So currently, all my insert function did was just add that release to the list and then pass it on to an observable, so the UI could update. So what we're going to do instead is get a reference to that database and actually insert it there. So I don't want to sit here and type all this and waste your guys' time, so I will just bring this in for you. Alright, so I still have that reference to the Firebase database. So Firebase is a little different. If you want to get the, like a database, you know, if you do like an insert, you'll get the primary key back. Firebase, you do a push first, and I get a reference to that node that I just pushed. Again, it's a JSON hierarchy, so it's like I just created a leaf element and I got the key to that. So just like if you're familiar with JSON, everything's a key value pair. So when I do a push, it essentially generates that key, but I haven't actually put a value there yet. So by getting the reference here, you can see I can get the key off of it. So if you want to store like the primary key on the race, that's effectively what I'm doing here. I'm doing a push to create the element on Firebase so I can get a reference to its key here, and I can update the race object itself. So that way I know each race which key it has. Okay, so then I'm going to just do this .child by key, so I'm saying I want to update the child at this key and set the value of the race, or I'm actually passing in the race itself. Again, there's a lot of Kotlin there, so if you're not familiar with that, I apologize. But in Kotlin, if everything's immutable, so when that comes in, I can't actually modify it directly, so I have to actually do a copy of it so I can change the value of it. So I'm updating the race to set the key on it so I can persist that race in the database with its key. So that will go ahead and store the race in Firebase. So now what happens is it's going to trigger this child added event. So what I want to do is I want to, again, I'm going to go ahead and just grab this here. I'm going to pull the race out. So this data snapshot comes back and it contains the race itself. You have to get the value and tell it which class type it is so it knows how to build that race. If it's null, I'll throw in a legal argument exception. But then I'll go ahead and add it to that races relay so the UI can update. So let's quick demo this. And I'll put the side by side so you can show it getting persisted directly. So go back to sign in with Google. So now that I'm hooked up to the database, I have no record. This is no longer in memory. So I can go ahead and put in some garbage in here and hit submit, and boom. In real time, you can now see it reflected here in the races element. So we can do that again. Boom, in the database, okay? But now the problem is, oh, if I do a delete, I haven't handled that in my app, right? So now it doesn't actually notify the app when that happens. So what I've done is I've already implemented all of that. So we can go ahead and let me go to, I have this event listener, which is all code that's not specific to Firebase. I'm just keeping track of all the models that I have and handling the logic of inserting them in the correct order. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but effectively I've implemented the on cancel, on child move, on child removed, on child added. I've implemented all that. And so instead of doing that here, I can just call my Firebase child event listener. And I'm going to give it the class, so it's a race class.java, and I'm going to pass it my relay so it knows to update that relay when it's done. Okay, so let's try this again now. Alright, so this should initialize with the one race in the list, if all goes as planned. so let's add another element in here. Updated, everything looks great. Let's try a delete. Boom, deletes in real time on the database and here in my app. Alright, let's push the limits here. Let's actually modify this. And it updates the value right within the app. So just by adding a listener and handling the different events, you have that real-time functionality. I did say I would test the offline mode, so maybe I should be brave here and try that out. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on airplane mode, and I'm going to go ahead and add a few more elements here. So I'm offline, it's not syncing to the cloud, I'm in airplane mode. Let me add another. Alright, I don't know how the syncing of this actually works. I have seen it work in practice, so we'll see how long it takes to sync, or what triggers it to actually sync. Let me see if I add more records, is it going to trigger?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure how they're actually firing that event, but I was offline, I stored some data, I was re-interacting with the app, and behind the scenes it went ahead and determined that it needed to sync it. So that's an offline mode. I didn't have to do anything special to get that to work, it just worked.
Insert.
Correct. I saw that in practice too. So yeah, if you kill the app, I don't know if it's...
It basically doesn't try to sync that. It basically says in the documentation, if you try to do an insert or update and your app restarts, that it won't sync it.
Yeah, I noticed that as well, because when I was testing, I tested the offline mode, I persisted some records, and I didn't see them reflected immediately when I reconnected. So I was like, well, that's weird. Maybe if I restart the app, it'll work. So I killed it manually, and then I noticed those were lost. So yeah, if you kill your app manually, that data that's stored in that kind of offline cache or temporary database is lost. So I don't know if that's by design or if that's a flaw or what. But yeah, so that is something to consider. If your app gets killed when you're offline, you will lose that kind of offline data. And maybe there's a way around that. I just didn't bother to research that. All right, so next up is analytics. So for analytics, let's go ahead and add that dependency here. Do a sync. So if those of you familiar with analytics, sometimes you'll work with systems where it has to actually update kind of in the background. So like if you're testing it out, it's kind of a pain because it's not in real time. So what Google's implemented is this concept of a like a debug mode where you can actually see the messages in real time. First, I need to actually also go into my manifest. So in order to use oh great, I didn't put those in here. Let me see if I can just grab those out of my... I don't want to have to... Yeah, these are what I want. So like a good presenter, I went ahead and made branches of everything working. So I have one here where in order to get this working, you have to add these permissions for analytics. So these are the permissions you need.
Why do you not have to use internet? Oh, it probably uses a different process. Because it might send it to the Google Play process or whatever.
It is using Google Play services because I noticed I had to add that dependency, so that may be an answer to that. But so I've added the dependency to my Gradle. I've added the permissions. Oh, I already had that set out in my notes. Okay, so now let's go ahead and show a custom event here. So on my dashboard activity, when I launch my add race fragment, I want to record a custom event. Alright, so if I was to run this app and actually look at analytics, I wouldn't see anything in real time. So in order to do that during testing, you have to enable this parameter, and let's see if I have it. I do. Okay. So if I go back in here and go to terminal and enable this for this particular app, now if I go into analytics, where's analytics? Oh, at the top. Alright. and I go to debug view. So right now I haven't actually restarted the app with the new changes, so there's no events occurring, but let's go ahead and do that. So let it spin back up, and you're going to see some events that I didn't do anything to really enable. It's just built in. Alright, so we should start seeing some events show up here. Yeah, so then they start streaming in, and these are all events that's working with the SDK by default. So if you want to know if there's screen views and that kind of thing, you can get that for free. But if I do my add, which should do my custom event, it's not quite real time with this, it appears. I should see my set content, I believe it's called custom view, show up here, hopefully. Alright, there it is. So this is the custom event, I believe, that I set up. Yeah, so I called it Google Developer Group with the content type of demo test. But so this is, again, all I did was add a dependency, and I had logged one event to get this select content event to occur. But yeah, all these others, if I want to know what screens were launched, you get all that kind of analytics for free. So that is the Firebase Analytics piece. So again, very little work to get that going. You get a lot of power out of the box for free. So
Is there a way to get consolidated reports?
On a there is reporting, and again, I don't know a ton about it, but they even show on here. I've got to remember where that's at. But
It's not much.
so you can inject it into yes. So you can import your data into BigQuery and then run queries off of it. So I think if you want more customizable views, I think you can get it from there. So good question.
That's a paid service, right?
BigQuery? Pretty much all this is paid. So yeah, Firebase is a for-profit. So yeah, BigQuery is probably no different based on how much data you're storing, how many, how much resources you're actually using. You're going to get billed for that.
They charge per query, like, and up to 5 terabyte, I guess it's free. It depends on your query.
All right.
Not all of Firebase.
Not all, everything. Analytics is free, I guess. Yeah.
So like
Some of them are
there's a
free.
limit on analytics, probably, right? You said the 5 terabyte.
I don't think, no, it's BigQuery.
Oh,
Analytics gives
BigQuery.
you, if you click on events, Nate.
Come on, we don't got time for that. We can play with that after I get through my talk here. Come on. All right. So notifications. I just uncommented the Firebase messaging dependency, and I'm going to go ahead and sync that and run that. So really, with very little work, actually no other work than adding the dependency, you can get messaging working as long as the app is in the background. So there is a distinction if your app's in the foreground versus in the background, and I'm assuming they do that because if it's in the foreground, a lot of times you want to do custom development. If your user is using the app, you probably don't want to notify them like, hey, new version's out. Like, I think they force you through a different approach if the app is in the foreground. But so as long as I run this with the app in the foreground, I'm sorry, in the background, I don't have to do anything else to get this to work. So let's let this come back up. All right, so my app's in the background. I'm going to actually try sending a message here to it via the console. So here's that little bit about segments. So I can choose, for example, like I want it to target this package or this particular app, because you can link different apps to the same Firebase project, so to speak. But I'll go ahead and send this. And again, we'll cross our fingers. Everything's been going so well so far. All right, boom. All right, so here it is. Here's my message that showed up. And literally all I did was add the dependency and boom, background messages are for free. So if I go ahead and launch the app, I can show you that it doesn't work. I think if I duplicate this and send it again, I should not get the notification because it's in the foreground. and correct. So I'm not getting the foreground messages. So to do that, you have to do a little bit of extra work, which is not hard. We'll go ahead and do that now. So I've already implemented this Firebase messaging service, which isn't too complicated. You just have to implement or extend this Firebase messaging service and implement the onMessageReceive function. So you guys can digest that here. But so as long as the notifications not null, what I'm going to do is whenever they that first thing we're doing is setting up a pending intent. That is for, I believe, when they click on the notification, where they're going to actually end up. If you want them to take them from that notification into the app, you can set that up with an intent, telling them which intent they're going to. Here I'm setting the sound, like which sound plays when the notification arrives, and just other different customizations for it. But so yeah, I'm implementing that onMessage service. Anything else to call? Oh, I do need to come into my manifest and add that. So whenever you implement these, not that, I don't know why I keep doing that. Alright, so did I not do that? Okay, let me come in here. I've already implemented this here. So I'm going to go ahead and define this new service here to reference that. So now that service is registered with my application, and it's going to handle that event. Is there any questions on this here? There's some stuff that I'm not even super familiar with. So there's that concept of a channel you'll see there. So you can set up different channels where if you want, I don't know if it sounds very similar to a topic when I read about it, but if you want, again, to distinguish which messages are received by who, you can use channels as a way of doing that. All right, so I've implemented that. So now I think that's all I need to do in order to get the foreground messaging working. So now I'm in the foreground, so I can test a new message here. We'll go ahead and send it to the same app. Go ahead and send it. Why isn't that? All right, there it is. Okay, so I did use a different icon. So there's my foreground message from Firebase just by implementing that message service. All right, the last one I'll demo is remote config. Okay, so remote config. Again, as we always start out, I got to go in here and enable it first in my Gradle file. Go ahead and sync that.
Probably ought to just start with full rebuild.
Yeah, I'll do that before I actually run it. So the next thing, so remote config is a way of, if you want to control behavior from Firebase. So let's say if you have a feature that maybe you want to run for a promotion for like a month, or just
Yeah.
what?
It's the same as the line above it.
Oh, the Gradle import.
Is it config?
Good guess.
Yes. All right. Okay.
Nailed it.
So yeah, if you want to control behavior within your app remotely, you can do so with remote config. So one of the first things you have to do, which I believe I already set up, is a defaults file. So the first time they run your app, maybe they can't, for whatever reason, they can't fetch this data. So you basically need to apply what's the default behavior. So we start out with the defaults XML file where you define it. So one of the features that I wanted to show is, let's say, enabling or disabling that add race functionality remotely. So by default, it's going to be disabled, and I'm going to basically turn that feature on remotely. So maybe, all right, so let's go into, where do I do that at again? Is that the, yes. All right, so let me go to my, so I'm not going to code all this from scratch again. So I'm going to get a reference to the remote config, just like we've done similar with the Firebase Database. And then I will go ahead and put this in here. Actually, I extracted out this method to actually toggle the state of visible or not on my floating action button. And then I'm going to, when this is created, go ahead and set this up here. Alright, so I get that reference to the Firebase config. Why does it not see my...
Closing bracket. Just the bottom one.
Alright. Alright, so grab the config remotely. I'm enabling this development mode, so there is, similar to the the analytics, there is some caching that's occurring. So if you want to like override that behavior so it fetches fresh every time, you can set development mode enabled. I'm telling it where to read the defaults file. That's that XML file we defined. So interesting enough, this callback where the data is changing on the Firebase side is only called if the data is changed. So that's why the first time I'm coming in here, I'm actually going to go ahead and set the fab visibility, because if it hasn't changed, you want it to basically inherit that default behavior. So I'm calling it up front first, and then that callback, similar to the Firebase database, when that data is changing on that back end, this add on complete listener will fire that is going to update our fab menu. So that is what this block is doing here. And as I said, I have this set fab visibility that's just going to toggle that plus button to true or false. So if we, oh gosh, I should have rebuilt. We'll just cross our fingers and maybe, just maybe it'll work this time. So no parameters. This is the remote config screen in web console. There is no parameter set up. Alright, so we're in. Our default is off, so there shouldn't be a plus item, or plus, yep. So our plus option is gone, we can't do it. So if I like rotate it to have it recreate it, nothing changes. So if you go back, oops, that's not what I wanted. Alright, so yeah, our functionality is disabled, so let's go ahead and introduce a property for that. Make sure I get the name right so it actually works. So it is add races enabled. And we're going to go ahead and set that to true. So you can add it and you have to publish it. So now that's published. So if I come back to my emulator and rotate, it should recall on create. And our plus option is is back, so we can add functionality again. So again, I can control that remotely. Update that, publish it, and when it redraws, if that
So
it didn't work, hold on, did I publish that? Okay, so that time it pushed through. So that is remote config. You can control properties remotely and actually have it impact your apps in the wild.
does that callback like finish after one callback or something? How come why wasn't it getting calls as you were publishing changes? So in your dashboard activity, that config callback, oh, so it is just a complete listener.
Yeah.
Can you not constantly listen to config changes like you can with the database?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a different, I don't think so, because even to get that to work, I have to enable developer mode. Like, they don't want you changing stuff and expecting impact, like instant results, because it's like cache. Like, they're not going to call every single time or be constantly listening. So it's much more of a it's cache. So they don't want to increase that load and fetching every single time.
You would maybe check at the start of the app and use that value for the life of the session.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can't. There is a way to set, like, I don't know if it's per property or what, but there is a way of like specifying the cache time. So maybe you want some values to be checked every 4 hours or something like that. So I think you can control them on a, I don't know if it's per config level or per property level, but yeah, if you want it to be something that is checked more frequently, you can do that if you want. But so yeah, there's my demo on Firebase.